Welcome to Talking Synths, Double Nickel Edition, episode 55. Woohoo! I'm Sam.
I'm Carlos.
We're with Syntaur, where you can get all the synthesizer parts you need, hopefully. And
during a worldwide pandemic, we may or may not have them, but feel free to drop us a line.
But we got more than just about anybody. Mm-hmm. And we got a lot of vintage synths and new synths and lots of cool stuff.
Always something different. And for anyone that's in the Hill Country or Texas region, I encourage you to stop by the showroom. No appointment necessary. Walk-ins welcome. We try to leave everything on, and I really just like to impress upon people that these instruments were made to be played. Come in, and you never know. One day it might be a DX1, it might be an OB8. Korg reissue of the 2600. We almost always have a Fender Rhodes. Stop on by, come play on some keys.
Yeah, stuff comes and goes so quickly, and we never know what it might be here. So.
And I always tell people when they walk in the showroom, come back in a month, it'll be totally different.
Yeah. And we're also supposed to say, this is an odd-numbered episode. If you want to get an episode every week, we do this every week, but the even-number episodes only appear on our Patreon page. So if you want twice the Talking Synths that you're getting now, go to patreon.com/synthwizards, and you can sign up there for $3 a month and get all this good stuff, plus more.
Yeah.
Now, you were talking about all the various keyboards in the showroom, vintage synths coming and going, and yesterday morning, I believe it was, I was sitting in my office, which is that way. The tech room is over that way on the other side of the building. I had the doors closed in the office, and I heard a sound, and I thought, oh man, that sounds great. I got to go see what that is. And this happens regularly enough that it really piques my interest, and I started thinking, what is it about a sound that draws me out of my office that I got to go over there and look, because y'all are making noises over there all day long, every day. So it's not just any noise that draws me out there. And the thing that really intrigued me was yesterday when I heard it, it was one note on, just a static sound. And I thought, that sounds so freaking good. I got to go see what it is. And I don't remember what note it was, but it was basically this. That's two Sawtooth waves, just oscillating. There's not a whole lot more going on than that. Or is there? And hence the question, hence the topic of this show. What makes a synthesizer sound good?
Whew, I think that's a tough one.
It is.
Because it's very subjective, because what might sound good to you may not necessarily sound good to me, sound good to Luke.
But I'll throw in here that when this happens, I've noticed that, when I get up out of my chair and go to the other side of the building and say, what is that? It's almost always, I can't think of an instance where it wasn't, a synthesizer that's usually vintage, but always expensive and desirable. So
or iconic.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is there's a reason why some synthesizers are so desirable. And the one in question here is an OB8, an Oberheim OB8. Now I got to say that Tom Oberheim, and I very much see ear to ear with Tom Oberheim. What his ears like, my ears are like, man, that sounds good. So I'm a sucker for old Oberheim stuff. It sounds so good. But it's not only that. I think the last one might have been the Roland RS.
RS. The Paraphonic.
The SH3.
The SH3. Yeah.
I can't remember. I wish I'd taken notes, but it's always something, that not only me thinks this sounds great. Not only Sorry, Mom, I got that right. My mom always busts me on this. So it's not just me. It's not just this guy that thinks that particular synth sounds great. It does sound great in a lot of people's mind, and that way it's become iconic and the prices have jacked up. So what is it that makes it so great?
I think there's a couple of angles that you could tackle this question. You know, I mean, no doubt, you know, a lot of it is the engineering aspect of it. You know, when you think of the great, you know, synthesizer, you know, engineers out there, Bob Moog and Tom Oberheim, Dave Smith, Curtis, Ian Fritz. It's like this Venn diagram of someone who is not only technologically adept, but also has a musical ear.
Yeah,
and that's not something that quite often goes hand in hand. Dave Rossum is another one.
Yep.
So I guess I tend to think of synthesizers like in building blocks. You know, you have your sound source, which could be a VCO, then your VCF and your VCA. And to me, to my ear, I think it's the filter.
I think you're right on most counts. I mean, I think, well, definitely that's a huge part of it, and that's well accepted in the synth community. And Oberheim filters just really sound good, but so do a lot of filters.
I don't know, we've had some pretty weak sounding filters in here too, though. There's been a couple that I've been kind of let down by, and mainly like some of the stuff that was like early Yamaha that's almost more pro consumer, you know, organy type stuff, and you go to sweep the filter and there's like almost no resonance.
Well, but resonance doesn't always equal good filter. I mean, like we saw on the OB8.
That threw me off on the OB8. And maybe you can just do a quick filter sweep and, you know, kind of show everyone, you know, the spectrum of what it's like to sweep a filter on an OB8.
Yeah. Oh, but did I play a note yet? I basically heard this. And it just sounds so great. It's such a... There's not much, there's not much filter movement going on, but I mean, you're not hearing resonant sweeps and stuff. And when I say what makes a synth great, I'm not talking about modulation capabilities or, you know, that does this or doesn't do that. I'm talking about just the basic sound of it. And God, that to me just sounds so good. But yeah, let's.
Because this one did kind of throw me off when we were sweeping the filter.
Let me make sure it's down. That's resonance full up.
Yeah, so it's not squelchy like an MS-20 or sharp like a Pro 1.
And there's the 2-pole. So you get more of the resonance that way, but I guess my point is big resonance doesn't necessarily equal great sound. I mean, this is a great sounding filter, and it reminds me too of the Yamaha CS80 when we were messing with that. You don't get that real sharp filter sweeps and all. You get a much more subdued filter, and the way it was described to us is it was purposely done that way because the Yamaha engineers were looking for the sweet spot of the most musical range of that filter. And if you don't have a range this big, you only got a range that big, and you're sweeping through it, you have a lot more finer control and all. And the CS80 sounds great, no doubt about that. So, yeah, it's not always the filter resonance, but what makes a filter sound great?
I think it's the frequency response. You know, as part of being humans, I think we've evolved to take in a lot of, just make use of our senses. And you know, so if you're out there in the wild and you got to listen for something, there's certain frequencies, especially in the higher range, that you're more attentive to. So I think the way that a filter is calibrated and tuned has a lot to do with it, but then also the way that it hits the VCA. I'm a real big fan of proper gain staging. I'm kind of in the camp that believes like all oscillators, for the most part, kind of sound the same, as far as a square wave sounds like a square wave, a triangle sounds like a triangle. The exception to the rule being sawtooths, because there are some sawtooths that are more shark fin. But you know, and I think we're kind of pigeonholing the conversation to these analog stuff, but I think there's great sounding digital stuff too. The ESQ1, the aliasing that you get in the lower registers, those oscillators sound fantastic. You know, I think there's this whole interaction that's going on between all the parts.
I think that's a real good point. And as you were talking, there were a few things that came to mind. I sort of posed this question on a synth forum last night and wanted to get some people's feedback, and several things came to mind. The funniest one, the one that really entertained me, was I basically put out there, I heard just one note playing and thought this was great, and the guy responded, well, which note was it?
Yeah.
Like, was it a D? Because the Ds are better than Cs.
I know I drive people crazy around here with my C major. I just throw everything in C major and I'm good.
But no, another thing came to mind is one guy was pointing out that that our hearing is very much mid-rangey, and some of these filters sound very mid-rangey, and I guess I would say this one does, and it's just warm and creamy, and maybe that is attuned to, you know, how the human hearing works better, and it's more pleasing to us. But then I think where you were going at the end really is probably the answer to this question, is how it's all gain stage, how it's all hooked together, and like you were saying earlier, the big picture of this isn't just a filter, it's how Tom Oberheim hooked this filter to the VCAs and whatnot. And so I'm gonna pull up a piece of paper here, because Mike Calarosa, who's a really good tech up in New York, really knows his vintage stuff. He really shed some light on this. His first sentence, he says, "A lot of the mojo is the VCA, which not enough people give credit to."
Thank you. That should be a t-shirt.
And he goes on to say 1970s VCAs were not high fidelity or low noise. And so there is some distortion and compression going on. And that has a lot more to do with it, I think, than people give credence to. And especially, you know, filter hooked up to the VCA, and how are those hooked up, and how is the gain staging, and how do those interact? So I think that's a real good point. Another thing that he got into a lot was, you know, each voice has a VCA, and so here it is 8 times on the OB8, and that's important. But then, what do you do with all those 8 voices? You got to sum them together, and there's another stage and another bit of electronics that goes into that.
Yeah, I believe on the Mini Moog, you see them a lot in the Eurorack world. A lot of people have cloned just the mixing section of the Model D. It's usually called, I believe, a CP3 mixer. And you see I've never really dived into that circuitry, but I'd be interested to see like what's so special about that. You know, that you're talking decades later, like even though maybe the format has changed, people are still like, oh, this is what I want in my system.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a sentence he puts in there. EMEAP, I guess it's how you say it, emeapp.org. You can go to that website. It's really cool. It's up in the northeast U.S., and it's sort of a museum, but it's more a research group. Are you familiar with them?
Is that kind of like the CCRMA out of Berkeley?
They're different because they take old vintage synthesizers, for instance, and really research them and figure out what they do and how they do it. And in fact, it's MEAP.org did extensive studies of the Mini Moog VCA that was conclusive. And so, yeah, I mean, they've taken this apart and they've looked at every component and how everything interacts and how things go in and what they look like when they come out, and exactly what you're saying. The Mini Moog has a distinctive VCA section, and whatever Bob Moog did to do that, more power to him, because it's wonderful.
So when I start thinking about things like that, and me and Nick were having this conversation when we're talking about component values, in a given circuit, and sometimes you see stuff that's like rated for crazy high voltage, and you're like, I wonder if this is what is necessary for this circuit, or if this is what they had laying around.
Yeah.
So it is one of those, what came first, the chicken or the egg, or necessity is the mother of invention, as far as like what, I'd be, just to be a fly on the wall, as, Bob Moog or Don Buchla was experimenting, breadboarding, trying out new circuits, and what if it was just a part that he happened to grab off the shelf, or he ordered too many, or if it was a bad batch of transistors, as the lore goes,
Bad in quotes, that might have imparted some magical quality to it.
Yeah, and I believe that's mainly with the 808, right? With the noise circuit.
Yeah.
It was supposedly a bad batch of transistors that Roland got for really cheap.
Yeah. And who knows if those really high rated things, do they make a difference with the extra rating? Or, does it impart some kind of quality to that the user never would have guessed beforehand?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, the engineers put the stuff together as they did, and the result was magic.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that he brought up the VCA, because that is one thing that I think people do kind of underestimate, is the power of gain staging and the power of the VCA.
And not only in the sense of making it perfectly clean and proper, but what happened with guitars in the 60s?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, we can kind of play this louder than it's supposed to be, and it gives it this crunchy, edgy sound.
And I'm always amazed at the amount of crossover or lapover there are between the two industries as far as guitar and synth-oriented technology, because Tom Oberheim actually did release, or he made one of the first commercially available fuzz pedals, the Maestro Bassmaster, I believe it was. So
that's true. That's how he started, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the Maestro stuff.
Yeah. So I think there's a very interesting history there that is just kind of, I feel like there's a younger generation that's getting into analog synths, and it's a wonderful conversation to have. And I keep catching myself saying analog synths, and I don't want to discredit digital synths, because there is a wonderful world of digital synthesizers out there.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I'm kind of, I know it's not going to happen. I'm kind of waiting for the resurgence of the Rompler, because I have, and you actually gave it to me, that Emu XL7. And I took the ROM out. Right. I took the ROM out and I put it in MP7, the Groove Box, and I think it's a great synthesizer. Those sounds, they're mainly single cycle waveforms that, during that time period of the 90s and early 2000s, RAM was not cheap. So in order to put a lot of these sounds into memory, not only did you have to carefully choose like which sounds were going in, so there was like this curation that was happening, that's someone's ear, that's someone's musical ear saying, I can only put 100 sounds in here, so it's going to be these 100 sounds.
Yeah.
But then also the Z-plane filters, great digital filters, fantastic filters. If you're someone out there who's just delving into synthesis and you love the analog stuff, do not shy away from digital. Just get your hands on it, try it out.
Yeah. Well, different tools to make, to make whatever music you want.
Yeah.
Some are suited to one part of the job, some suited to the other. But yeah, the digital stuff, you're kind of working within constraints, and you got to squeeze those waveforms down to a single cycle or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're not going to sound
crispy,
clean.
Yeah, or yeah, it's just, it's such a multifaceted thing. You know, the way that we perceive sound, but then also the way that sound is generated and the way that sound is made. And I say this to anyone who walks into the showroom, like, if you're into making noise, this is the golden era. Like,
Yeah,
this
no
is,
doubt.
you know, you could have synthesizers more powerful than any 90s Rompler on your phone.
Amazing. Okay, so here's another thing that I remembered now to bring up from what you were saying a while ago. A number of people commented on square waves. I mean, part of my initial question was, isn't a square wave made by Roland the same as one made by Yamaha, the same as one made by some digital process going
Ones and zeros, you know?
But it's not, or at least that was a number of people's feedback. TB303, square wave. They're going to swear that it doesn't sound like any other square wave. It's got its own quality.
But is that the raw square wave, or is that the square wave going through the Squelchy 303 filter?
With the filter all the way open and not really filtering.
Yeah.
And I did see somewhere, I think I did a little quick research, I think it's got a little spike on it or something. It's not exactly square, but a number of people said early Roland era square waves have a hollow smoothness to them that others don't. And that's interesting to me. I mean, if you look at the raw square wave on an oscilloscope, is it going to look different?
Yeah.
It must have some kind of, you know,
unique characteristic,
Yeah.
and then which I would assume would come down to component choice, you know, and just using the technology that was available at the time.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, and I mean, I've read some articles also about, you know, triangle core versus sawtooth core oscillators, especially when you're looking at things like a ramp saw wave, the way that it resets will impart, you know, a unique sound.
But that would all show itself on an oscilloscope.
Yeah.
So I guess when I say square wave, I'm meaning exactly square, and the real world doesn't really work like that. So yeah, this brand's square wave might not sound the same as that.
Yeah. I always tend to have like a little bit of like dubious, you know, like, but how much can you really hear the difference of, you know? But some people have golden ears. Mine are not golden.
But it all, it may be real subtle, but somehow it all adds up. Because when I hear that, that's the wrong note.
That was the wrong note.
When I hear that one note on an OB8, and it just sucks me in and makes my brain happy, it's got to be a combination of all these subtleties. Like the oscillators are great, I'm sure. The filter is wonderful, and the gain staging or whatever on the VCAs is just right on. And hats off to Tom Oberheim and everyone else that makes these things.
And I know, you know, I threw out a couple of names. Those are just the ones that I could think of off the top of my head. I'm also the firm believer that there are so many unsung heroes of the synthesizer world, especially when it comes to the engineering aspect of what it takes. And we saw this at KnobCon, you know, because at KnobCon it was cool because we got to meet the makers. Yeah. You know, and it's cool that this has Tom Oberheim's name on it, and this is an OB8. But with that, I mean, I guarantee you there was a team of wonderful people that poured their heart and soul into this instrument. And that's a part of why it sounds so great. Yeah. And it really would be cool to kind of give credit where credit is due. And we kind of try to do that with some of our Synth Wizards episodes. We got some really cool stuff in the works, so I'm really excited about that. But I just hope this is like a conversation that we can continue, and maybe as time goes on, like more credit starts going to the people that deserve it. You know? At techs, I mean, there are so many wonderful techs out there that keep these instruments alive. You know, that's a kind of another area where I feel like unsung heroes of the synth world.
Yeah, well, maybe we can sing about them a little more.
Yeah.
Oh, but one other thing popped into my head just now about the filters, that the early OB8s went to the CEM filter, I think, and the synths before that used a 3080
OTA.
Yeah, and the earlier ones with the CEM filters didn't sound as good, and then they went back to the 3080s. I may be messing that up, but the point being that, yes, somewhere in there, Tom Oberheim or his unsung hero staff members said, you know, we kind of lost a little of the mojo there.
Yeah.
And they went back and found out what it was component-wise and filter topology or design-wise, and said, no, let's get it back to that.
I'm excited to see where the technology will go. You know, I believe Sound Semiconductor is doing some really cool, really fabulous stuff, bringing affordable analog filters and new VCOs to the market that are finding their way into hands of makers. But, you know, and as we were talking about, you know, how your ear is tuned for those mid-range frequencies. And I mean, I'm already starting to get tinnitus, you know, from going to so many concerts. And so then I began to think of augmented reality. And so what could it be if, you know, in 20 or 30 years, you could have your hearing enhanced? Like, would I want my hearing enhanced? Would I want to have a golden ear? If I could pay for a golden ear, would I want it? The answer is probably not. Because I have glasses and I hardly wear them. Because it's like too much information, too much detail. I should probably wear them more when I drive.
That's an interesting concept, though, to be able to enhance your hearing like that. There's probably going to be a Eurorack module.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you just set some control voltage to your eardrum. Play your eardrum like a real drum, send it a gate signal.
Anyway, it's really a fascinating topic to me. Why does a good synth sound so good?
Yeah.
So it's a deep subject, but hopefully we've shed some light on it and touched on some interesting things here. And we'd love to hear your feedback. If anyone's got some, send it on in the comments. And maybe we'll touch on this again.
Yeah.
But I guess we're probably about to the end of our time here. So until we see you again, we'll modulate.